Parents always favored my golden child brother and cut me off for my startup. Now my company is booming, he lost everything, and my parents demand I pay off his entire mortgage. I am 29 years old. As I sit here looking around my beautiful house, watching my amazing 27-year-old wife, Maya, resting on the couch with her hands gently resting on her growing pregnant belly, I feel a sense of peace that I never thought I would actually get to experience. My life right now is quiet, secure, and full of love. But to understand why this peace is so incredibly hard-won, I have to take you back to where it all started. I have to tell you about my family, or rather, the people who used to be my family. You know how in some households, there is that one kid who can do absolutely no wrong? The kid whose mere existence is treated like the greatest gift to humanity? In my house, that was my older brother, Preston. Preston is 31 now, but ever since we were kids, he was the undisputed, unchallenged golden child. My parents, Gregory and Margaret, did not even try to hide their blatant favoritism. It was not just a subtle preference, it was the defining rule of our entire household. Everything revolved around Preston. If I brought home a straight-A report card, my parents would barely glance at it, maybe give me a distracted nod before going back to whatever they were doing. But if Preston managed to scrape by with a B- on a history test, my mother would bake a cake, and my father would slip him a $20 bill, praising him for his hard work and dedication. It was exhausting. Growing up, I was essentially a ghost in my own home. Every achievement I had was invisible, completely overshadowed by whatever mundane thing Preston had done that week. I remember one specific time when I won first place in a regional science fair. I worked on my project for months, staying up late, pouring my heart into it. When I ran home to tell my parents, they shushed me because Preston was in the living room trying to beat a level on his video game, and my excitement was apparently distracting him. I learned very early on that my role in the family was to stay out of the way, make no demands, and never, ever try to eclipse my brother. My parents curated this toxic dynamic where Preston was groomed for absolute greatness, while I was basically treated like an afterthought, a backup child who was only there to make Preston look better by comparison. I spent my entire childhood swallowing my pride and accepting that I would never be enough for Gregory and Margaret. Fast forward to 5 years ago. I was 24 and Preston was 26. True to my parents' endless prophecies, Preston was doing very well for himself in the corporate world. He had gone to a prestigious university, naturally fully funded by my parents, who had explicitly told me I would have to figure out my own student loans. Preston was working at a major financial firm, wearing custom suits and playing the corporate game perfectly. Then it happened. At 26 years old, Preston was promoted to vice president of his division. He was the youngest vice president in the history of his company. To say my parents lost their minds with joy would be the understatement of the century. They threw him a massive, lavish dinner party at a ridiculously expensive steakhouse in the city. They invited extended family, neighbors, and even people they barely knew, just to show him off. I was there, sitting quietly at the end of the long table, wearing a decent but off-the-rack suit, working my standard 9-to-5 job. I was doing fine for my age, paying my own rent, completely independent, but in that room, I was practically a peasant. Throughout the entire dinner, Gregory and Margaret used every opportunity to publicly humiliate me. My father stood up, clinking his glass, giving a speech about how proud he was of his successful, brilliant son. He then looked directly at me down the table and made a joke, loud enough for everyone to hear, about how my modest paycheck probably could not even cover the cost of the wine we were drinking that night. He laughed. My mother laughed. The whole table chuckled politely. They kept comparing his massive year-end bonus to my yearly salary, telling me that I needed to stop wasting my time and buckle up if I ever wanted to be in the same league as my brother. I sat there, gripping my napkin under the table, feeling my face burn with a mixture of profound embarrassment and boiling anger. But it was in that exact moment, listening to their cruel laughter, that something inside me just snapped. I realized I had zero interest in climbing their corporate ladder or playing their game. For years, I had been secretly developing a business model for modern, custom tech accessories for cars, specifically smart dash cameras and custom interior lighting setups. I had the research, I had the prototypes, and I had the drive. That dinner party was the catalyst. I decided I was going to stop playing it safe. I was going to launch my business. Few days after the dreaded coronation dinner, I decided to formally present my business plan to my parents. Deep down, despite everything, I think there was still that naive little boy inside me hoping that maybe, just maybe, if I showed them something real and tangible, they would be proud of me too. I was not going to ask them for a single dime. I just wanted their moral support. I wanted them to look at my blueprints and my market research and say, "Good job, son." I drove over to their house on a Sunday afternoon. They were sitting in the living room, drinking coffee. I pulled out my folder, laid out my financial projections, my product designs, and explained my vision. I told them about the gap in the automotive tech market and how my products could fill it. I poured my heart out, speaking with more passion than I ever had in my life. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. And then, Gregory looked at Margaret, and they both started laughing. It was not a chuckle, it was a loud, mocking, hysterical laughter. My father wiped a tear from his eye and asked if this was some kind of elaborate prank. I stood there, frozen, telling them I was completely serious. My mother crossed her arms, her smile fading into a look of absolute disgust. She told me that my idea was nothing but a doomed garbage project. She said it was embarrassing that after all the money they spent feeding and housing me growing up, this silly little hobby was my big idea for the future. Gregory chimed in, his voice dripping with condescension. He told me that the business world would chew me up and spit me out. He said I was not smart enough, not ruthless enough, and frankly, just not capable enough to run a company. They explicitly stated that they refused to introduce me to their friends as a failed mechanic, especially not when they had a vice president for a son. They told me to fold up my little papers, go back to my cubicle, and be grateful I even had a job at all. Every word they spoke was designed to tear me down, to keep me in my place, far below Preston. They did not even look at the numbers. They just looked at me, and all they saw was a loser. I did not cry. I think I was too angry to cry. I calmly packed my papers back into my folder, zipped up my bag, and looked them dead in the eye. I told them that I was going to quit my job the very next day and start my company, whether they supported me or not. I told them I did not need their permission to chase my own future. The atmosphere in the room instantly turned ice cold. My father stood up, his face red with sudden rage. He pointed a finger at my chest and delivered the ultimatum that would change my life forever. He said that I was free to do whatever I wanted, but I was not free from the consequences. He told me that if I went ahead and quit a stable job for this pathetic pipe dream, they would be forced to cut me out of their lives completely. My mother nodded in agreement, adding that I would be a total embarrassment to the family name, and they already knew I was going to fail and come crawling back for a handout. They said they were sick and tired of having to explain to their friends why one son was making hundreds of thousands of dollars while the other was playing around with car parts in a garage. They told me I had a choice right then and there. I could stay at my corporate job, keep my head down, and remain a part of the family, or I could walk out that door, make a fool out of myself, and never speak to them again. They thought they had me cornered. They truly believed that the threat of losing them would terrify me into submission. But they severely underestimated how little their presence actually meant to me at that point. I looked at my father, looked at my mother, and felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hard clarity. I told them that the choice was incredibly easy. I picked up my bag, told them to have a nice life with their perfect son, and I walked out the front door. I did not look back. The moment I started my car and drove away from their house, I felt a massive, invisible weight lift off my shoulders. As soon as I got back to my apartment, I took out my phone and blocked Gregory's number. Then I blocked Margaret's number. Then I blocked Preston's number, just for good measure. I deleted them from all my social media accounts. I went scorched earth. I knew exactly what was going to happen next, and I was right. Within a month, the quiet exile began. I stopped getting invitations to family barbecues. My aunts and uncles suddenly stopped returning my texts. My parents had clearly gotten to the rest of the extended family first, spinning some wild narrative about how ungrateful and delusional I was, and how I had disrespectfully abandoned the family. The realization of what they had done hit me in waves. It is a very strange, very hollow feeling to realize that your parents never actually loved you unconditionally. Their love was entirely conditional on my obedience and my willingness to stay beneath my brother. When I stepped out of line, they discarded me like a broken toy. But I didn't have time to sit around and mourn a family that never really wanted me anyway. I had a company to build. The next day, I walked into my office and handed in my 2 weeks' notice. My boss thought I was crazy. My coworkers wished me luck with sympathetic smiles that clearly said I was making a huge mistake, but I didn't care. Maya, who was just my girlfriend at the time, was the only person on the entire planet who stood by me. She didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I was stupid. She just held my hand and said we would figure it out together. That was the moment I knew I was going to marry her one day. I traded the toxic noise of my family for the terrifying, deafening silence of being completely on my own. Let me be completely honest with you. The first year of my startup was an absolute living hell. It was not glamorous. There were no fancy offices or venture capital meetings over expensive lattes. I rented a cheap, unheated, run-down industrial garage on the edge of town, and that became my entire world. I spent my days covered in motor oil, soldering wires, and testing prototypes until my fingers bled. I spent my nights sleeping on a stained mattress in the corner of the garage because I often worked until 3 or 4 in the morning and was too exhausted to drive home. My bank account drained faster than I could have ever imagined. There were weeks where I literally survived on instant ramen noodles and cheap black coffee. At one point, a supplier completely scammed me out of $5,000 worth of essential components, and I remember sitting on the cold concrete floor of my garage, putting my head in my hands, and almost breaking down. I was so incredibly isolated. During the holidays, while my parents and Preston were likely carving a massive turkey and drinking expensive wine, I was shivering in my garage, trying to fix a circuit board. But the hardest part was watching Maya sacrifice for me. She was working her demanding job at the bank, and because my income was exactly zero, she took on extra night shifts doing remote data entry just to make sure we could pay the rent on our small apartment. She never complained, not once. But seeing her exhausted face every morning was the fuel that kept me going. I refused to let her down, and I absolutely refused to prove my parents right. Every time I felt like quitting, I would hear my father's mocking laughter in my head, calling me a failed mechanic. That memory was like a shot of pure adrenaline. I kept grinding, kept cold calling local auto shops, kept refining my product. I poured every ounce of my anger, my trauma, and my desperation into building something undeniable. Before we get into the crazy part of the story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps this video reach more people, and I really appreciate your support. The turning point didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing grind, but about 1.5 years into the business, the wheel finally started to turn. A mid-sized local dealership took a chance on my smart dash cameras for their premium vehicle packages. The quality of the product spoke for itself. They loved it. Then, word of mouth started spreading. 1 contract turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. Suddenly, I wasn't cold calling anymore. People were calling me. The real breakthrough came when a major automotive tech distributor saw my products at a regional trade show. We sat down, hashed out the numbers, and they offered me a massive distribution contract that completely changed the trajectory of my life. I remember the day the first major deposit hit my business account. I just stared at the screen, watching the numbers, and I started laughing and crying at the same time. I immediately called Maya, told her to quit her awful night shift job, and took her out to the fanciest restaurant in town. Within 6 months of that contract, I moved my operations out of that freezing, miserable garage and into a sleek, fully staffed commercial warehouse. I hired a team of engineers, a marketing department, and an actual accounting staff. The days of eating ramen on a concrete floor were officially over. The vindication I felt was intoxicating, but I didn't rub it in my family's face. I didn't need to. I just kept my head down and kept building. Fast forward to the present day. It has been 5 years since I walked out of my parents' house. My company is now a multi-million-dollar enterprise. We have contracts all over the country, and I am living a life that the 24-year-old version of me could not have even hallucinated. I bought a stunning, custom-built house in a beautiful, gated suburban neighborhood. I drive a high-end luxury car that I personally customized with my own company's tech. I am completely financially secure, and, honestly, I have everything I ever dreamed of. But the best part of all this success is not the money or the cars. The best part is Maya. 2 years ago, I stood at an altar overlooking the ocean and married the woman who believed in me when I had absolutely nothing but a crazy idea and a garage full of spare parts. My wedding was perfect. It was filled with our closest friends, Maya's loving family, and the colleagues who helped me build my business. Noticeably absent, of course, were my parents and my brother. I didn't even send them an invitation. I didn't want their toxic energy anywhere near the best day of my life. I knew through the grapevine that they were fully aware of my success. I kept in touch with exactly one cousin who occasionally gave me updates. She told me that my parents knew I was rich now, they knew I had a big house, and they asked about me sometimes, but their stubborn pride kept them from ever reaching out. They were probably waiting for me to come groveling to them, apologizing for my past behavior. But that was never going to happen. I had built an empire in total silence, without a single drop of their help, and I was perfectly content pretending they didn't exist. Then, a few months ago, life gave us the greatest gift of all. Maya came out of the bathroom one morning, holding a plastic stick with tears streaming down her face. She was pregnant. We were going to have a baby. We spent the next few weeks in an absolute bubble of pure, unadulterated happiness. We started decorating the nursery, picking out names, and dreaming about the future. We hosted a small, intimate dinner at our house to share the news with our inner circle of friends and Maya's parents. Sitting there at the head of my dining table, looking at my beautiful pregnant wife and the life we had built together, I felt a brief, fleeting moment of sadness that my own child would never know their paternal grandparents. But that sadness was instantly replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. I realized that keeping Gregory and Margaret away from my family was not a punishment, it was a shield. I was breaking the cycle. My child would never have to compete for love. My child would never be called a failure or an embarrassment. My child would grow up in a home where they were valued just for breathing. I was at peace. My life was completely full, and the ghosts of my past were firmly locked away behind a 5-year wall of silence. Or so I thought. Because right when everything was perfect, the wall came crashing down, and the ghosts decided it was time to pay me a visit. It was a totally normal Tuesday evening when the ghost of my past decided to reach out. I was sitting in my living room, going over some supply chain reports on my tablet, while Maya was reading a baby book on the couch. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced down and saw a text message from my aunt. Now, I had not spoken to this aunt in 5 years, ever since the big fallout. The message was long, and as I read it, my stomach instantly tied itself into a heavy, familiar knot. She wrote that she was reaching out on behalf of Gregory and Margaret. She said my parents were desperate to see me, that they had heard how incredibly well my business was doing, and that they wanted to clear the air. They wanted me to come over to their house for a cup of coffee. I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to delete the message, block her number, and go right back to my reports. But the anxiety was already creeping in. Maya noticed my sudden change in posture and asked me what was wrong. I handed her the phone. She read the message, let out a deep sigh, and handed it back to me. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I told her I had absolutely no desire to go, that it was a trap, and that they only cared because I had money now. Maya, with her incredibly sharp, analytical banking mind, looked at me and said something that changed my perspective. She said that running away from it would just leave a question mark hanging over our heads, especially right before the baby arrived. She suggested I treat it like a bad business meeting. Go in, sit down, find out exactly what their agenda is, and then close the account for good. No loose ends. I knew she was right. If I ignored it, they might just escalate and show up at my house uninvited. I needed to control the narrative. So, I took a deep breath, typed a short reply to my aunt saying I would be there on Thursday afternoon, and mentally prepared myself to step back into the lion's den. Thursday afternoon arrived, and I drove the 45 minutes across town to my parents' house. Pulling into their driveway felt incredibly surreal. The house looked exactly the same as it did 5 years ago. Same paint, same mailbox, same meticulously manicured lawn. I parked my luxury car right in front, took a deep breath to steady my racing heart, and walked up to the front door. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. Margaret was standing there, wearing a massive, bright smile that did not reach her eyes. Gregory was right behind her, extending a hand for me to shake. It was the most bizarre, jarring experience of my life. These were the people who had literally laughed in my face and told me I was a pathetic embarrassment. Now, they were ushering me into their living room like I was a visiting dignitary. They immediately started complimenting me. Gregory asked about my car, noting the custom modifications and asking how much a machine like that cost. Margaret poured me a cup of expensive coffee and started gushing about how she had seen an article online about my company's recent expansion. They were laying it on incredibly thick. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, giving short, polite answers. I did not smile, and I did not engage in the small talk. I just waited. Finally, after about 20 minutes of this painful, fake warmth, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Gregory cleared his throat, leaned forward, and dropped the facade. He looked at me with a serious, almost sorrowful expression, and said they had a confession to make. It was about Preston. My ears perked up. Gregory explained that Preston had been very unlucky lately. Apparently, his massive corporate firm had gone through a huge restructuring phase. There had been mass layoffs, and the upper management had been completely gutted. For months ago, Preston, the golden child, the youngest vice president in company history, had been fired. Margaret chimed in, her voice shaking slightly, saying that Preston had been sitting at home for 4 months, deeply depressed, refusing to look for another job because he felt completely humiliated. I sat there processing the information. I felt a tiny, petty spark of satisfaction, but mostly, I just felt confused. I asked them why they were telling me this. This is where the mask completely slipped off and their true, delusional nature revealed itself. Gregory looked me dead in the eye and said that Preston was in serious financial trouble. When he got his big promotion years ago, he had bought a massive, insanely expensive house right in the center of the city. A real mansion to show off his status. Now that he had been out of work for 4 months, his savings were supposedly drying up. Margaret looked at me, folded her hands together, and delivered the punchline. She said that since my company was making millions of dollars, and since I had plenty of disposable income, it was my duty as a brother to step up. They were not asking me to give Preston a job. No, that would be too simple. They demanded that I use my company profits to pay off Preston's entire mortgage. Not just a month or 2 of payments. The whole thing. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. To save the family's dignity, they said. So Preston wouldn't have to suffer the embarrassment of a foreclosure. I literally laughed out loud. I could not help it. It was the most absurd, unhinged demand I had ever heard in my entire life. I put my coffee cup down on the table, stood up, and looked at both of them. I reminded them that 5 years ago, they called my business a garbage project and threw me out like trash. I reminded them that they told me I was on my own. Now, they wanted me to write a massive check to save the golden child who had never done a single nice thing for me in his entire life. I looked at Gregory and told him my answer was absolutely, unequivocally no. I told them I would not give them a single dime. The fake smiles vanished instantly. Margaret's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She started yelling, but I didn't stick around to listen. I turned my back, walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove away, feeling a massive rush of adrenaline. By the time I got back to my house, my phone was absolutely blowing up. Gregory and Margaret had realized that I was completely serious about not giving them my money, and they went totally nuclear. I had unblocked them to reply to my aunt, and they were taking full advantage of it. I received over 20 text messages in the span of an hour. They called me every name in the book. They said I was a petty, vindictive, selfish monster who was hoarding wealth while my own flesh and blood was suffering. They sent voice notes screaming about how they had raised me, put food on my table, and paid for my childhood, and this was how I repaid them. They acted like paying for a child's basic needs was some sort of massive financial loan that I was now defaulting on. I sat on my couch with Maya, playing the voice notes out loud. She was absolutely horrified by the venom in their voices. Instead of arguing back, I simply blocked their numbers again. I blocked my aunt's number. I blocked every single relative who might try to act as a flying monkey for them. But the negative energy was suffocating, and I refused to let it ruin the peace I had built. Maya and I had been planning to announce her pregnancy to the wider world in a few weeks, but we decided to do it right then and there. We wanted to reclaim our joy and drown out their toxic noise. We posted a beautiful photo of the ultrasound and a tiny pair of sneakers on our social media pages. Within minutes, the comments and congratulations started pouring in from our real friends, my colleagues, and Maya's wonderful family. We spent the rest of the evening reading the beautiful messages, completely ignoring the meltdown happening on the other side of town. I thought that ignoring them would starve them of oxygen and make them go away. But I underestimated how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. 2 days later, they crossed a line I never thought they would cross. I was sitting in my office at my company headquarters, looking over some new product designs with my lead engineer. The phone on my desk rang, and it was the receptionist down in the main lobby. Her voice sounded panicked. She told me that there was an older couple downstairs demanding to see the CEO, and they were causing a massive scene. I knew instantly who it was. I told my engineer to give me a minute, walked out of my office, and looked over the glass balcony that overlooked the main lobby. Sure enough, Gregory and Margaret were standing right in the middle of my company lobby. Margaret was pointing her finger at the receptionist, loudly proclaiming that she was the mother of the owner, and she demanded to be let upstairs immediately. My employees were staring. Clients in the waiting area were looking uncomfortable. It was a calculated ambush to embarrass me in my professional environment. I did not go downstairs. I did not give them the satisfaction of a screaming match in front of my staff. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the head of my building's security team. I told him calmly that there were 2 unauthorized trespassers in the lobby harassing my staff, and I needed them escorted off the premises immediately. I watched from the balcony as 3 large security guards approached my parents. Gregory tried to puff out his chest and argue, but the guards were professionals. They firmly guided my parents toward the revolving glass doors. The look of absolute humiliation on my father's face as he was physically removed from the building that his failed mechanic son owned was something I will never forget. They were utterly disgraced in front of dozens of people. I went back into my office, sat down at my desk, and resumed my meeting. I thought the lobby incident would finally be the end of it. Surely, after being thrown out by security, they would retreat in shame. But toxic people do not feel shame. They only feel vengeance. The next morning, I woke up, made coffee for Maya, and opened my laptop to check my personal email. There was a message sitting in my inbox from an anonymous, randomly generated email address. The subject line was completely blank. I clicked it open, and my blood instantly ran cold. It was a short paragraph, but it was dripping with pure evil. The email said that because I was a greedy, heartless monster who was leaving my own brother to rot, the universe was going to punish me. It explicitly mentioned Maya's pregnancy. It said that my unborn baby was going to suffer for the sins of its father, and that my child would grow up to hate me just as much as my family hated me now. It wished nothing but pain and misery on my pregnant wife and our unborn baby. I did not need an IT expert to tell me who sent it. It was Gregory and Margaret. They had seen the pregnancy announcement online, realized they could not reach me by phone, and decided to hit me where it hurt the absolute most. A primal, dark anger washed over me. It was a kind of anger I had never experienced before. You can insult me, you can threaten my business, you can call me a failure. But the second you threaten my pregnant wife and my unborn child, all bets are entirely off. My hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. I did not show the email to Maya. I deleted it immediately because I refused to let that poison near her. But the mama bear and papa bear instinct kicked in hard. I realized that ignoring them was no longer an option. They were unhinged, and they were a legitimate threat to my family's peace of mind. I picked up my phone and called my corporate lawyer. I told him I needed a favor, and it had to be done today. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I had a heavily stamped, legally binding document sitting on the passenger seat of my car. It was a formal cease and desist order drawn up by my attorney, outlining a strict no-contact boundary. I drove directly to my parents' house. I did not knock this time. I rang the doorbell and stepped back. Gregory opened the door, a smug look on his face, probably expecting me to come crawling back after their email campaign. I didn't say a single word. I simply thrust the thick manila envelope into his chest. He instinctively grabbed it, looking confused. I looked at him with absolutely zero emotion. I told him that inside that envelope was a legally binding document forbidding them from contacting me, my wife, my company, or my employees ever again. I told him that if they sent another email, made another phone call, or ever set foot near my property again, my legal team would rain hellfire on them and drag them through the court system until they were bankrupt. Margaret appeared behind him, her jaw dropping. I looked right past Gregory and spoke to her. I told them that wishing harm on an unborn child was the most vile, disgusting thing a human being could do, and it proved exactly why I cut them off 5 years ago. I stated clearly and coldly that they were dead to me. They would never see me again, and they would never, ever meet their grandchild. I turned around, walked down the driveway, and got back into my car. They didn't scream this time. They just stood in the doorway, staring at the legal document in their hands, looking incredibly small and pathetic. The ghost was finally exorcised. I felt a massive release of tension in my neck and shoulders. The war was over, and I had won. I drove home to my wife, ready to leave them in the past permanently. 3 days passed in absolute, beautiful silence. No emails, no texts, no surprise visits. The legal threat had worked perfectly. I was in my garage, polishing the dashboard of my car, just enjoying a quiet Saturday, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw a name I had not seen in 5 years. It was Preston. I stared at it. I had unblocked him years ago when I switched phones and never bothered to reblock him because he never reached out. My first thought was that Gregory and Margaret had forced him to call me to beg for the mortgage money. I answered the phone, fully prepared to hang up on him. I gave a cold hello. There was a pause on the other end, and then Preston spoke. He sounded exhausted, but not angry. He asked me if it was true. He asked if our parents had actually come to my office and demanded that I pay his mortgage. I was taken aback. I told him yes, it was true, and I asked him why he was acting surprised. What followed was a conversation that completely flipped the entire script of my life. Preston let out a bitter, echoing laugh. He told me that he had absolutely no idea they had done that. He told me the real truth. Yes, he had been laid off 4 months ago. But as a vice president, he had been given a massive, golden parachute severance package. He had hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. He wasn't struggling to pay his mortgage at all. In fact, he had several lucrative job offers sitting on his desk. He was intentionally taking a few months off to travel, decompress, and recover from severe corporate burnout. He had never asked our parents for a single dime, and he certainly never asked them to harass me. My parents had completely fabricated the entire crisis. Why? Because they were deeply, physically embarrassed that their golden child was technically unemployed. They could not handle the social stigma of him taking a break, so they invented a narrative where he was a victim who needed saving, and they tried to use my money to force him back into a high-status position to save their own image. I was absolutely stunned. I told Preston everything: the fake dinner, the ambush at my office, and the horrific email about my unborn child. Preston was dead silent on the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was trembling with absolute rage. He apologized to me. The golden child, who had never said sorry for anything in his life, gave me a sincere, profound apology. He told me he was going to handle it. And handle it he did. From what I gathered from my cousin later that week, Preston drove over to Gregory and Margaret's house and unleashed an absolute hurricane. He ripped into them for trying to control his life, for treating me like garbage, and for making him look like a desperate beggar. He told them they were sick, obsessed with status, and toxic to their core. He packed up a few childhood things and told them he was cutting contact with them too. Gregory and Margaret, completely desperate and losing control of both their sons, tried to play the ultimate victim card. They went on Facebook and posted a long, tearful status about how modern children abandon their loving parents. But it backfired spectacularly. My cousin, armed with the truth I had told her over the years, rallied the extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins flooded the comments, publicly shaming Gregory and Margaret for their years of blatant favoritism and their recent psychotic behavior. The backlash was so severe that my parents deleted their social media accounts and retreated into total isolation. They are now entirely alone in that big, quiet house. As for me and Preston, we are not suddenly best friends. There is too much history and too much distance for a magical movie ending. But we exchanged a few respectful text messages. We found a mutual understanding, a strange kind of brotherhood forged in the realization that our parents were the real enemy all along. We declared a truce. I put my phone down, walked upstairs, and found Maya painting the walls of the nursery a soft, warm yellow. I wrapped my arms around her waist and rested my chin on her shoulder. The storm was completely over. The toxic roots had been pulled up, and only the good things remained. Am I the jerk for completely cutting off my parents and refusing to pay a single dime for my brother's house, even though it tore our family apart? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your verdict in the comments below. See you in the next story.